Welcome to the Future of Education podcast. Here's our host, the co-founder of 2-Hour Learning, Mackenzie Price.
Welcome to Future of Education. I'm Mackenzie Price. I'm super excited for you to join me today because we're going to have a really great conversation with Dr. Richard Savage. He's the superintendent at California Online Public Schools. They provide a very enriching and personalized tuition-free online learning experience designed to meet individual, unique needs of each and every student. And today, Dr. Savage and I are going to discuss how parents can help their kids overcome hurdles in traditional brick-and-mortar education environments. So here's my conversation with Dr. Richard Savage, superintendent at California Online Public Schools. Dr. Savage, it is a pleasure to have you today. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you for the time, Mackenzie. It's also a pleasure of mine to meet with you and to discuss what we love, education.
I can't wait to jump in. And I'll tell you what, I'm really excited to have you on as a guest because what I spend a lot of time doing is talking with parents who say, hey, I would love to be able to send my kids to your school. We have a totally unique model that we do at the schools that I run. But, A, we don't live in a city where your school exists, or B, we can't afford the tuition that comes with this. What are we supposed to do given that we're stuck in this system that we're in? And I think the first question that I'd be curious to learn about from you is what are those challenges that you're hearing most students who have trouble in kind of a traditional brick and mortar environment have? And then what is it that your schools do to offset that?
So this is a great question and a great starting point. We are kindergarten through 12th grade. And so I think oftentimes where parents struggle at the early primary grades is a little bit different than what they might struggle with at the high school grade level. For those early elementary ages, they're having a tough time fitting into the mold that the traditional educational setting wants to fit them into. They don't do school well. There are behavior management issues. There are social cue issues. We've had kids that don't like the fluorescent lights that you find in a traditional classroom setting. And so in order to overcome that, an online environment where mom or dad can look right over the shoulder of their child, see exactly what their child sees, and help them as a learning coach as they go through their academic year is something that a lot of our parents have found very refreshing. You get to the high school level, a lot of times that social setting that a high school student finds themselves in, yes, it is important, but also sometimes it's not very healthy. There's 1,500 pairs of eyeballs that are judging your child because they have the wrong color shoelace or their hole in their jeans is in the wrong spot. And these types of social pressures aren't what we're going to deal with later on in our adult life. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of times if a child finds themselves or a parent finds their child in a situation like that that's not very healthy, come to our school. Again, it's in a protected environment. They're in their own home. They're getting their education is delivered to them in the friendly confines of their personal computer. Mom or dad can look over the shoulder. Mom or dad can see the communication they have with their peers, and everything is out in the open. And it's a safer setting for a lot of these children that are struggling, trying to conform.
Okay. Well, it sounds like when you describe that at both the earlier ages as well as later, you might almost say some of these kids are they're having a negative experience or they're feeling troubled in some way. I'm curious, do you also get students who maybe are doing fine in a traditional environment, but are feeling like they're held back or having any challenges that way? Or is it really one for students who are struggling somehow?
Absolutely. So we do try and meet the needs of many, right? And so we will have students that are advanced. And maybe the traditional setting is not allowing them to move further or move beyond what they would normally do. In our setting, again, because our teachers don't have 35 children, human beings sitting right in front of them, we allow our students to advance. They can go as fast and as furious as they would like. We also have a wider variety of advanced placement courses because we're not tied to a bell schedule like the traditional setting is, where, if you're going to allow a teacher to teach AP psychology, well, by golly, they better have 20 students in that seat. Otherwise, we're wasting money. In our environment, we can have 5 kids. There are only 5 kids that are taking AP psychology. It doesn't cost us any more money. So we can offer a wider array of elective courses to further enhance a child's academic experience, if you will.
Well, let me ask you a question, Richard, and this is something else that I think I sort of beat the drum regularly that traditional school's broken, right? The model's outdated. You know, a teacher teaching the same lesson to 20 plus students just doesn't work anymore. But I don't know if everyone feels that way. And I'm curious because you've been in a public environment, you still are in a public school environment. And for me, it really has never been about public versus private. It's about the traditional model versus a new model of education. So I want to ask you that question. Do you believe the traditional model is broken?
This is another really good question, one that I've had to answer many times.
I'm good at questions, right? It's a good thing I have a podcast because I get to ask all these great questions. So.
This is awesome. So I have actually had to answer this question many times since I've gotten out of the traditional setting. Here's my opinion. I think the traditional setting was designed for and is meant to please the masses. I think it's okay for about 80 to 85% of our student population.
Really? You think that many?
I do. I do. What about that 15 to 20 though? What's going on with them? And I think a lot of times those students feel less important because they don't fit into that mold. Forgive this expression, if you will. A lot of these students are square pegs. They've been forced into a round hole and they don't fit.
Right.
And we are that square hole that the square peg fits into rather nicely.
Yeah.
Right. So we are one of those types. I love championing those students that don't fit into the public or the traditional setting very well. I love being a solution. I cannot tell you how many times in the last 11 years that I've seen a parent come to me in tears because we feel like home for their child. I'm not sure I'm saying that right, but they are comfortable. They're happy. They're comfortable in our environment. I can't tell you how many times I've heard from a parent, Johnny finally loves school. You have no idea how different his perspective is. He cannot wait to log into his computer and get his work done. And even just that simple little piece means so much to some of our students. To be able to log in their pajamas and get their education means the world to them.
It does. And I think that what you just said is what is so fundamental to changing the entire trajectory of a student's career. If they love school, that makes such a huge difference. It's actually our number one commitment that we have at our schools is that kids will love school. In fact, we survey our kids every 6 weeks and say, do you love school? And would you rather go to school or go on vacation? That's how important it is, right? It's really important to have that. And when you mentioned that, you have parents who are, crying tears of joy to finally see their kid fit in, on the inverse. And I know you've mentioned that you have experience. You worked in the public system for a long time. Those same tears are coming out as tears of frustration, tears of sadness, tears of empathy when they're in a traditional environment and their child is struggling, right? So
right.
It's a challenge for the traditional school, brick and mortar kind of school environment when they do have whatever that percentage of kids where this just doesn't work for them. Of course, it's squeaky wheel, right? You've got parents who are unhappy, you've got kids who are unhappy, you've got all of the challenges, both academically and emotionally, that come with that a traditional school is having to try and figure out, how do we deal with this and still help, as you're saying, the 75 or 80% of students that you think this is working for. I would argue, I don't think it's that high. I think there's a lot of advanced students who aren't crying, but are not having their needs met the way that they should. I think the kids that are struggling end up having maybe a louder voice because it's such a big problem for parents. The kids who are crushing it, but maybe just not getting what their needs met, I think that's a higher thing. So I would say it more works for about 40% of the kids. That's what I think, kind of the middle. But we can agree to sort of disagree on that. I think we've got the same idea in mind.
Absolutely.
So yeah, that's a challenge. When we have kids that are struggling, it puts a big weight on the traditional school environment as well, and the administrators and the teachers who are trying to do this. One of the things I always hear is before we get into the details around like what your school does.
Yeah.
I'm curious from your experience and what you see, how can parents, if there's a parent listening to this saying, gosh, I'm struggling with this, what's the advice you give them for how to work with their school and their educators to try to solve some of these social, emotional obstacles that come up?
I'd say the first thing that they would need to do is, an email gets some attention. A phone call, maybe a little bit more. Got to get down to that school, and you got to see the whites of the eyes of the counselor, the assistant principal, the principal, and you need to let them see the whites of your eyes. So the second thing, don't come in as angry mama bear.
Right.
Angry mama bear, there are times for angry mama bear, angry papa bear, but this 9 times out of 10 is not one of them. If we come in as angry mama or papa bear, we tend to really just a switch is flipped and not listened to. Come in with a solution focused, right? Come in with a plan and communicate that plan calmly, but with passion.
Mm-hmm.
And then as that plan is communicated, use that nonverbal communication and see if you're kind of getting shined or if you're actually being listened to. Fourth thing I would say is follow up on that plan. We can't expect things to happen overnight, but I do think 2 or 3 days, maybe a week is a reasonable amount of time to see action. If that action doesn't happen, either I would say, depending on how well that first meeting went, follow up with that same individual, or I would head over to the district office and meet with the superintendent, maybe a board member. Unfortunately, sometimes it takes that to get action that you need. And then if still not seeing anything, I would look into other options.
Yeah. You kind of describe the experience that I had when my kids were starting school. As my oldest daughter was in kindergarten, I started seeing things that I was frustrated by, that my daughter was frustrated by. And it started with conversations with the teacher, right? And I probably wasn't as good as the advice you just gave around always being like coming in as an advocate and a partner in doing this. But for the most part, that's what I tried to do. And then over a couple of years, there was a lot more work. I started working with the principal. I ended up with the superintendent, and at a certain point, the principal had become a really great friend and ally to me. And I remember she looked at me and she just said, Mackenzie, I totally understand what it is that you're wanting and trying to do. And I empathize with that. But this is like trying to steer the Titanic, and we just can't get those changes to happen. And it was a really great way. She's a profoundly gifted principal, but it was a great way of getting that message of like, I just don't think this is going to fit the needs of your student. And at that point, I realized, okay, it's time to move on. But that advice that is so important is, and when parents are feeling stressed out because their kid is struggling, having a hard time, I think they often can come in guns blazing, right? And upset. And we have to remember the teachers want to help these kids, right? The administration wants to help these kids. So trying to come at it collaboratively is a super great point to kind of make on that, and really important to do that. Do you think that the traditional kind of brick and mortar schools, are they getting better at being a little bit more nimble and flexible to help students that are struggling? Do you think out of those, let's say 20% of students that are struggling, do you think that some percentage of those students the school can work with, or is it like trying to steer the Titanic?
Unfortunately, I wouldn't be where I am if I felt like the traditional setting was nimble and able to meet the ever-changing demands of our future generation. If that were the case, charter schools, online schools wouldn't exist. But unfortunately, they do. And it's because I've done some research. It's 3 to 5 years for a traditional school setting to change.
Wow. Okay.
It takes 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, that's a challenge. That's really hard to imagine that you're not going to see those quick moves for that. So it's really interesting that California has done a great job of creating this alternative. We're still in kind of a world, I would guess, where not every school has this option, but how many states have an option like what you guys offer?
So I can guess I would say there's probably 34 to 38 states that would allow an online charter school the way that it exists in California. There are a few states that will not accept charter schools and will not accept an online component.
Wow. Well, that's fantastic. So we've had discussions in the past with about charter schools. So hopefully, audience, if you haven't or aren't familiar with charter schools, go check out one of those episodes. Let's talk about the online school component. When we say online school, parents immediately get this PTSD of COVID and what that looked like. Is that what your online classes look like? Are they Zoom lectures with just a teacher somewhere else and kids in the classroom, or are they asynchronous? How does it work?
So we offer asynchronous. Well, it's synchronous to start, but it's not mandatory that our students are in that synchronous component. We have kids that are not professional, but on the way to being professional athletes. We have kids that are actors on Disney Channel. Somebody in Disney Channel has shared that come to California Connections, and here you go, because we there was a couple of shows. We had every child actor that was on that show was a student of ours.
Wow.
So they can't make it to the synchronous live lessons. So then we encourage them to watch the recording. So it's synchronous to start, but we make them available and they can attend them asynchronously on their own time frame and schedule. You brought up some really good points. I think that so every once in a while I'll meet with somebody and they'll refer to me as a virtual school. And I don't like that because virtual reality virtual, oh yeah, you're going to a virtual school, like it doesn't really exist, right? And so that's why I absolutely prefer online. We have been in existence since 2004.
Okay.
We were doing things this way 15 years before the pandemic was even an idea.
Mm-hmm.
And so when that pandemic hit, nothing changed for us. We were doing things the way we've always done them. And I think that what scared me a little bit is that these brick and mortar traditional setting schools tried to do exactly what they do in the traditional setting in an online format.
Right.
Where, like you just said, they have a teacher that wants to lecture for an hour on webinar. Guess what? Kids are going to tune out after 30 seconds. They're done. They're out of it. So our teachers engage with their kids. They talk with their kids in that, and we don't do an hour-long session. In fact, if it goes longer than 30 minutes, it better be very dynamic and very engaging for our kids, right? We try and keep it between 30 and 45 minutes. And there's a lot of student breakouts. There's breakout groups. There's kids are grabbing the mic. They're participating. They're talking. There's very little sit and get. Today's teacher should not be, I am the bestower of knowledge. That's not going to work for this generation. Our teachers nowadays need to be facilitators. They need to help our children engage in dynamic experiences that are going to allow for our kids to acquire the knowledge while they're working through problems with each other and looking at things from a real world perspective.
You are preaching to the choir on that. And I love what you say about this generation of kids do need a different environment. And that's when we think about, what I want parents to kind of take away from this is to know there are alternatives, right? You're not just bound to the brick schoolhouse that's on the end of the bus route for your child. It does take some work, right? It takes either, in the event that your kid's having trouble, it takes going in and trying to work with the school to fix that problem. And sometimes they're able to do that. But in the cases where they're not, there are other alternatives. And, the alternative that Richard is bringing up that, I think some other states have is a pretty incredible option. And it's not online Zoom school. It's a totally different experience that kind of speaks to this new generation and where education should be heading. And I love that. I want you to walk away just kind of having some hope that there are other alternatives out there besides just what is down the street. Dr. Savage, I'm really excited to talk with you, and we're going to continue this conversation if you're game for that. How's that sound?
Absolutely. Sounds great.
Okay, well, wonderful. We'll keep it going. But for now, this wraps up this episode of Future of Education. And thanks to Dr. Richard Savage. He's the superintendent at California Online Public Schools for joining us. Tomorrow, we are going to discuss how you can identify the best school environment for your child, what's right for your kid. If you want to learn more about what Richard's doing, go check out the website californiaops.org and get that as an example, and then you can see what your state has to offer. If you didn't have a chance to take notes while listening, head over to futureofeducationpod.com. We've got summaries of our episodes. We've got contact info for our guests. And of course, you can always reach out to me on social media. My Instagram handle is at futureof_education on Instagram, or you can search for the Future of Education channel on YouTube. And if you haven't subscribed yet, we're going to publish a podcast pretty much every day. So hit that subscribe button. That's all for today. But until next time, remember, kids are limitless. Our job is to help unlock their potential.